Okay, in terms of the sustainability, well, the Sustainable Development Goals, what we have is a statement of where we want the world to go, how over the next 15 years we can come and bring together these objectives relating to social objectives, environmental and economic objectives. And if we're going to reach these ambitious targets, we need to know how do we achieve this. The last 15 years since the Millennium Development Goals have given us a lot of guidelines about the importance of knowing what we're trying to achieve, the approaches, so for example the successes in relation to health, in relation to poverty reduction. How can we take those lessons learnt and apply it to this really important objective of becoming more sustainable for all people on earth, whether they're rich or poor, in every country. So having the understanding of how we can achieve this, how we can work together, and also how we can start to measure progress as we start to deliver this very ambitious set of objectives. I believe that understanding the role of ecosystem services is absolutely crucial, because ecosystem services describe how the environment provides services that are so important to people. Everything that a human being, that society does, is dependent on the environment, whether it's the food that we eat, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe comes from these natural systems. So understanding how these benefits are provided, how we use them, but also the types of trade-offs. If we are using a natural environment to produce food, it may not necessarily be available for other services, whether we're talking about recreation, production of trees, or the implications on water. So we need to understand how we can manage these landscapes to maximise the benefits that society has, but to do it in a way that is itself sustainable, so that our children and their children can also benefit from these services coming from the environment in the future. So it is truly sustainable. Going back to the first definition of sustainability, is about using resources in such a way that doesn't unduly compromise the ability of future generations to also benefit from the environment and all resources actually. Thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the things that I personally am very interested in is, after the UN approves the goals later on in September, is then to ask, okay, what is the science that we require to deliver this ambitious agenda over the next 15 years? Much of that can be done from science that already exists, by taking our existing knowledge, packaging it in a way that addresses those goals. However, there are some questions which need more research, which need more knowledge. So what I believe we need to do is to actually link up with the policy community, link up with the decision makers, and help them to articulate their questions in such a way that we can address this by research, deliver that research and the results more collaboratively, and take a really good effort at taking the results and putting it into form that could be used. So what might that mean? In the South Asian region, one of the big questions on sustainability is water. So what are the scientific questions, the research questions which need to be addressed to be able to be thinking about sustainable use of water in South Asia, where you have got pressures of population, changing income status with more demand, climate change, changing rainfall patterns. All of these things are coming together. So when you start to think about usage of water over the next 20 to 50 years, those patterns are going to have to change. So what are the key things we need to understand, both for above ground water, but also aquifers, extraction? How do we become sustainable in that? At the same time, there's the whole issue about the quality, about pollution, salinisation, arsenic, all of those things are big challenges. So how do we distill that into a few researchable questions, and then how do we pull together the community in such a way that can answer that? One of the things which we have learnt is that research which can address these problems needs to approach it from more than one discipline. It's not just the environmental science, it's also social science, political science, and bringing that together. So that's what we tend to call interdisciplinary research, but really doing it in a serious way. Doing it at a scale which means something. So whilst it's interesting to know what happens at a single community, that may be 100 people. What we need to know is the answers which is relevant for hundreds of communities, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Well, that's the first thing about the SDGs is that they are different from the Millennium Development Goals, and they differ in a couple key aspects. Firstly, the Sustainable Development Goals will apply to all countries on Earth, which is what we call universality. But the second thing is that countries will be allowed to decide which goals, which indicators are relevant for there, so they can make it contextual. And it's only going to be when we start implementing the goals that we'll really start to understand what this means in practice. Very much like the MDGs, it was several years after they were agreed that we started to understand what that meant in practice. And so for a country like India, it will be a political process which I hope lots of groups will feed into. So you would have science, you'd have civil society, you'd have business saying, let's have a dialogue what sustainability will mean for India. That is a really important thing about having a proper discussion to understand what the national priorities are. Then it's as important about defining the goals as what are you trying to achieve by that. The indicators are there to really help measure if the country is moving in the right direction. But I believe that you need to really focus on what you're trying to achieve. So if we come back to the water example, that all people in India have access to clean drinking water, that the industries which require water have got what they require, that the communities, the tourism, all of these things, as what does this actually mean in practice, and focus on that, what you're trying to achieve at a national level, and then use the indicators as a way of helping to assess if you are moving in the right direction. So the indicators are necessary, they are helpful, but you need to actually look beyond that in terms of defining what any country is trying to achieve. And there's going to be a really important role for groups such as researchers, for civil society, in terms of holding a country true to what it's trying to achieve and say, right, this is what we committed to do. Are we actually delivering that? And that will go beyond the indicators.